desperate hunt for the Brussels bomber still on the run tonight. Police identify two brothers as the suicide attackers, but at least one suspect is still at large. A minute's silence is held across the country to remember those who died. And two men are convicted in London over a plot to bring carnage to British streets. I'm live in Brussels with the very latest on the terror attacks.
And in other news tonight, junior doctors up the stakes. Next month's walkout will be the first in history with no emergency cover.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin in Brussels and Mary Nightingale in the studio.
Good evening from Place de la Bourse in Brussels, the focal point for this city's response to yesterday's terrorist attacks. Tonight, the manhunt for the terrorist cell behind the bombings is still underway. One of the airport bombers and the metro train bomber have now been identified as brothers. The second airport suicide bomber has not yet been named, nor officially has the so-called man in white captured on an airport security camera. Today, in a city still under tight security, thousands of people paused in silence to honour those caught up in these atrocities. Our first report on the aftermath of the Brussels attacks is from our Europe editor, James Mates.
Heavily armed troops on the streets of the city that styles itself as the capital of Europe. It sends a terrible message, even if it reassures these commuters as they head down into the Brussels metro system, just 24 hours after 20 of their fellow commuters died. What would reassure them more would be for two of the three men in this photo to be quickly apprehended. Caught on CCTV at the airport yesterday, on the right, if he's who police think he is, may be the man who built the bombs in both Paris and Brussels. Prosecutors are sure the man in the middle blew himself up and 14 with him. The perpetrator in the middle of the photo is one of the two suicide bombers, he said, and has been identified by his fingerprints as Ibrahim Bakroui, a Belgian. The second suicide bomber on the left hasn't been identified. The third suspect in a light jacket and wearing a hat is on the run. The first of their victims was named today as Adelma Tapia Ruiz, a 36-year-old Peruvian. Her Belgian husband and twin daughters had moved away from the airport check-in. They, therefore, all survived. At midday precisely, she and 33 others were remembered across Belgium with a minute's silence. The centre of Brussels coming to a standstill as thousands stood and remembered. Twice the Belgian people have stood in solidarity with the French after attacks that originated here in Brussels. Now they are mourning their own dead, but as they do so, they're asking whether the radicals known to live amongst them can be stopped before they attack again elsewhere in Europe. In the crowds were many Belgian Muslims praying publicly for peace and worried that all Muslims here are being blamed. But there is clearly a problem of near zero cooperation between police and the wider Muslim community. Is the problem here in Belgium that not enough Belgian Muslims will cooperate with the police and tell them what's going on?
I think it's the work from police too, that they have to contact more people from Muslim community to work with them, because it's we want that police work harder than before. Now it's time to wake up.
As Muslim, we should know that a person who kills anyone should be behind the bars. Even in Islam, he must be judged for his acts. So the one who is hiding him or helping him is not a Muslim according to the Holy Quran.
Bridging that divide may be the only way the jihadi threat in Belgium can be beaten. In a modern, open city, security can never be 100%. Europe's long list of vigils for the dead may only end when police and community root out the threat at its source. James Mates, ITV News, Brussels.
So it's been a day of, intense frustration for the security services leading the hunt for those behind the bombing. Turkey's president said tonight his country last year deported one of the bombers, Ibrahim el-Bakrawi, and warned the authorities he was a militant. Earlier today, a man was arrested in a police raid, prompting rumours their key suspect had been seized, rumours that quickly proved false. Our security editor Rohit Kachru reports on the frantic search for leads in the terrorist manhunt.
No one can question that this attack was shocking. What's being disputed is how surprising it was. It's claimed tonight that there were precise warnings beforehand, and that when one of the bombers was deported from Turkey last year, officials warned Belgium that he was a militant.
Daha önce Haziran 2015'te
one of the Brussels attackers was caught in Turkey in June 2015 and was deported.
A forensic examination at first light. A block of flats, a Brussels suburb, rooms searched, items recovered. More raids, more arrests today, but with every inch forward, investigators seem to take a step back towards Paris and the conclusion that there are more suspects on the loose. The naming of Najim Lashroui today as one of the suspects appears to be the final link between the Brussels and Paris attacks. He's the man on the right of the CCTV image. His DNA was found on explosive belts detonated at the Bataclan and Stade de France. Last year, he travelled to Hungary with Paris suspect Salah Abdeslam. He'd also been to Syria in 2013, where he's thought to have learned to make bombs. Then there are Ibrahim and Khalid el-Bakrawi, brothers with arms who killed themselves yesterday. Khalid has been the subject of an Interpol red notice since August. Ibrahim is thought to have fled a home raided last week. A neighbour told me he noticed Ibrahim moving in last September. He saw all his belongings, so helped to carry his new fridge up the stairs. Bakrawi refused to engage with him after that. Greetings were met by a cold stare. And then this. One question for Belgian authorities is whether they knew enough to prevent it. Rohit Kachru, ITV News, Brussels.
Well, in Britain, the Brussels bombings have evoked dreadful memories of the 7/7 London attacks 11 years ago. But there was yet another reminder today of just how close we still come to similar outrages taking place on Britain's streets. 2 men in their 20s have been convicted at the Old Bailey of a plot inspired by so-called Islamic State to kill soldiers, police officers and civilians in a series of drive-by shootings. Rupert Evelyn reports on how the moped plot was uncovered and stopped.
Fam, it's 5 in the morning. Feds are in my block. They're just blowing off man's door. Fam.
A terrorist plot in the final phase of planning is stopped. An early hours arrest before bloodshed on the streets of London. Tariq Hassani and Suab Majid were the terrorists, inspired by Islamic State to carry out a series of drive-by shootings in the capital. They'd enlisted the help of Nathan Cuffey and Niall Hamlet to provide them with the weapon needed to kill. A self-loading Baikal pistol complete with ammunition and a silencer.
There was a real potential that the attack could have been carried out. What that meant is that 2 individuals on the back of a moped committing a drive-by shooting in West London, specifically targeting the police or the military or members of the public, causing fear and distress and panic amongst communities. So I'm glad to say that we've intervened early and we've thwarted this terrorist attack.
Tariq Hassani was the leader, the son of a diplomat who studied medicine but turned to violent extremism.
My name is Shakil Mohammed Isa.
Just 5 years ago, he was a child actor with the lead credit in a public awareness film. In it, he was the victim in a movie aimed at cutting crime. But Hassani became radicalised and was part of a network of British jihadists. This included Mohammed Emwazi, known as Jihadi John, the British terrorist responsible for the murder of Western hostages in Syria.
It's images of in and around Shepherd's Bush police station.
Presented with the evidence of his plan and his internet searches, Hassani initially made no comment, but eventually he admitted to his murderous intentions aimed at soldiers and police officers. Although Hassani's target were officers at the police station, In such a busy shopping area, it's highly likely that members of the public would have been caught up in the attack. Had they not been caught, it is the police's belief that Hassani and Majid's ambition of an Islamic State-style terror attack would have taken place on the capital streets. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, London.
And our security editor Rohit Kachru is here with me now. So Rohit, there we have it, a significant plot in the UK foiled. One here, tragically not so, of course. What does this tell us about the daily, weekly battle fought by the security services against the terrorists?
Well, as we've seen those two cases that we've reported on there, from Shepherd's Bush to Paris to Raqqa to here in Brussels, this incubator of extremism, there are many things that are different in these cases, but there are many themes that are actually universal. One of them is the fact that these are all terrorists, but in these two cases they appear to be gangsters too, young men who form these friendship groups, who've influenced each other somehow. And for all the talk of online modern radicalization, this was all about face-to-face influence, face-to-face extremism. For Tariq Hassani there, he built this network around him. He was part of the same group as Mohammed Emwazi, Alexi Koti and others. And interestingly, we've unearthed a message he posted online just before he was arrested, where he was asked why he became an extremist. He said he met some older practicing brothers, started hanging around with them. It sounds like such a simple problem to confront, but of course we know and we see almost every day now that it really isn't.
All right, Rohit, thank you very much indeed for that. And according to the latest official figures, 31 people are known to have died in these bombings and around 270 were injured. Today, the names of the victims began to emerge. Among them is this young man, Leopold Hecht, a university student from Brussels who was just 20 years old when he died from his injuries. There's also growing concern for a missing British man, David Dixon, who contacted his family to reassure them he was not at the airport before boarding the metro. Martin Geisler now on the difficult task of accounting for all of the victims caught up in these attacks.
As the hours pass here in Brussels, the identities of the victims and the wounded begin to emerge. But it's a slow process, and for so many friends and relatives, the agony of uncertainty grinds on. David Dixon from Hartlepool is still missing. He contacted his family to reassure them he hadn't been caught up in the airport attack, but it's feared he then boarded the metro train which was bombed.
His friends in Brussels, his friends around the UK. He's got lots of friends at desperate times, just hoping that he's going to be okay.
Paul Tucker has been monitoring social media from the fitness studio he runs here in Brussels, desperate for news of his colleague, Karen Northshield. She was due to fly to America yesterday morning. He's heard she may now be in intensive care in one of the city's many hospitals.
You know, you have to sit and wait for news. I mean, the agony for us or my colleagues and I is small compared to obviously the agony for the family. But yeah, it's a waiting game, I suppose, for information.
Tonight, soldiers stand guard outside all Brussels hospitals. Dr. Nima Tabrizi was on duty at the University Hospital yesterday, treating a stream of casualties as they were brought in. In some, he said, the psychological trauma was as obvious as the physical injuries.
They were not able to speak because they were too much injured, from bird injuries to head injuries. And the one who could speak, they were in emotional shock. So the only thing that they could say was, it's horrible. That's what we heard from those patients. It's horrible, it's horrible.
Some hospital staff took a moment today to join their country in silence. Then, back to work. The aftermath has only just begun. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Brussels.
And that's it for now from Brussels. Join me again a little later in the programme. But now back to Mary in the studio in London.
Thank you, Mark. Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Junior doctors here say next month's industrial action will be an all-out strike. And flash crash trader facing extradition to the US. Those stories and more after this very short break. Hello again, welcome back. A look at some of the news here in Britain so far today. And junior doctors have raised the stakes in their dispute with the government over working conditions to critical level. For the first time in the history of the health service, junior doctors in England are planning to carry out a full strike next month with no emergency cover. Our health editor Rachel Younger is here. So Rachel, why are they doing this and why now?
Well, because it seems to the junior doctors that the 3 strikes they've carried out so far have simply been shrugged off by the government. Why is that? Well, it's not least because their managers and colleagues have managed so efficiently to minimise the disruption to patients. And because urgent cover wasn't affected anyway, on the last strike, for example, almost half of junior doctors were in because they were rostered to cover urgent care. Now, that's all going to change. Let's have a look at the dates. The next strike is planned to begin on Wednesday, the 6th of April at 8 a.m. for 48 hours. Now, that will go ahead as planned, so it won't affect emergency cover. However, the 48-hour strike, which is scheduled to begin on the 26th of April, will now only happen between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. on the Tuesday and Wednesday, but will become a full withdrawal of labour. Now, the Department of Health says that's a desperate and irresponsible measure, but the junior doctors say they don't know what else to do, despite the risk to patients.
There will be consultants, specialist doctors, allied health professionals in the hospital. If there is an emergency, doctors will be there to provide services. But the fact is the government simply refused to enter into proper dialogue with us. And when you're in this position and they're actually imposing a contract on us, we have very little option left.
We talk of the risk to patients. What does it actually mean to patients?
Well, I've been speaking to a number of chief executives at some of the big hospitals tonight, and they're worried. They're really worried. They've got into the swing of things over the past few months. They've been able to cover these routine operations, reschedule them. But A&E, that's a very different matter. The numbers of patients coming in through the doors are already up 10% on the same period last year. So they are very clear about this. This is going to put patients at risk. Junior doctors, however, counter by saying if they continue to be so thinly stretched, the NHS is going to be in deep and sustained trouble anyway.
Rachel Younger, thank you. A judge ruled today that a British financial trader accused of helping to cause a multi-billion-pound crash on Wall Street can be extradited to the United States. Navinder Singh Sarao became known as the Hound of Hounslow while he was operating from his parents' home in West London. Duncan Golestani reports.
For Navinder Sarao, extradition to the US is now a real possibility. A judge today ruling he can be sent to face charges he caused a Wall Street crash.
What the heck is going on down here?
The US authorities believe he made more than £500,000 in one day, May the 6th, 2010, the day of a so-called flash crash. Trillions of dollars wiped off the value of American companies in 5 minutes before they bounced back. Navinder Sarao is accused of spoofing, placing orders before cancelling them, profiting from the change in price. In total, 22 charges have been made. It's here at his parents' house in West London that Navinder Sarao is accused of making millions of pounds from illegal trades. In order to extradite him, the US authorities had to prove dual criminality. That is, that the alleged offences are crimes not only in America, but also here in the UK. On that, today a judge said a convincing case has been made. Navinder Sarao's fate now rests with the Home Secretary, Theresa May. She will decide if he is extradited.
The decision that the Secretary of State has to make is very limited in what she can consider. So it's highly likely that she will order his extradition. What his legal team then need to do is appeal against the decision of either the district judge in sending it to the Secretary of State or the decision of the Secretary of the State herself.
Navinder Sarao's lawyers say they will appeal. He has always maintained he is innocent. Duncan Golestani, ITV News.
Moving on to other news now. The mother of the murdered schoolgirl, Paige Doherty, said today that she is absolutely devastated and appealed to anyone with information to come forward. The 15-year-old's body was found in bushes at the side of a road in Clydebank on Monday, 2 days after she was reported missing by her family. The Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police is to stand down. David Crompton's decision to retire comes after he faced criticism over his handling of the Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal. The disgraced footballer Ched Evans must wait until next month to learn whether or not he's won his appeal against his rape conviction. The former Sheffield United player was convicted of raping a 19-year-old woman in 2012. The Court of Appeal judges reserved their decision at a hearing in London. And the struggling retailer British Home Stores, otherwise known as BHS, has been given a lifeline today after creditors voted to back its plans to turn around the business by slashing the rent it pays. The department store chain wants to revive the business by cutting costs and preventing widespread store closures. And that's it from here now. Back to Mark in Brussels.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. Well, this attack on Brussels was widely predicted and feared, but that in no way lessens the shock to this city or the pain of those involved. The people here now have to live with the reality that they are vulnerable, but already some here are talking of resilience and defiance. I spoke to commuters who went back to work on the metro this morning.
On the Brussels metro this morning, it was a rush hour like no other. For a start, there was no rush, perhaps understandably, and in truth it seemed more troops than trains. Those that did pull into central Brussels were carrying people who wanted to send their own message to the terrorists.
We are not going to live in a fear or a scary environment forever, so to move forward as soon as possible. So.
Later we travelled a few stops, but still there were few people and little conversation.
I mean, there is nobody in the subway. There is, like, normally there is a lot of people, and I mean, yeah, it's very bizarre and weird.
And how important do you think it is that the people of this city continue as normal?
Well, I think it's very important, because if you act differently, then it's a way to tell them, yeah, you won and you have power on us. So, yeah, I think it's really important to go on with your life and do what you like to do. And, yeah, I think it's very important.
Above ground, life does go on pretty much as normal here. But it's the new normal. Life in the shadow of the terrorists, with the constant threat of sudden violence and bloodshed.
And our main story this evening, one of the airport bombers and the metro train bomber have now been identified as brothers. Meanwhile, a manhunt intensifies for the man in white captured on CCTV. A third suicide bomber has not yet been identified. And a minute's silence was held across Belgium today to remember those who died. Thousands of people and officials paused to honour those caught up in the attacks. The city remains under tight security, and all the while, a big crowd gathers in the square behind me here. That's the way it looks this evening. Tom Bradby's here at 10, but from all the evening news team in Brussels and in London, bye-bye.